Let's get right into it. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most infamous, heavily debated maritime disasters. We're going way past the surface-level legends to break down the exact sequence of events, the specific human decisions, and the unbelievable engineering factors that ultimately doomed the RMS Titanic.
On its first journey across the Atlantic, the largest and most luxurious ship ever built struck an iceberg. In just a few hours, the symbol of human engineering excellence became one of history's greatest tragedies.
Act 1. The Ship of Dreams. Okay, let's dive into this.
Back in the early 1900s, the White Star Line decided they were going to completely dominate the seas. Not with speed, but with sheer unprecedented size and absolute luxury. Built by the Harland and Wolff shipyards over in Belfast, the Titanic was literally the largest moving man-made object on the entire planet at the time. I mean, it took 3 million hydraulically driven rivets just to hold this massive Leviathan together, and to helm this engineering marvel on her maiden voyage. The White Star Line chose Captain Edward Smith. He was affectionately known as the Millionaire's Captain because of his social grace with the elite. This voyage was actually intended to be his final, triumphant crossing right before his retirement.
Now, before we go any further, we absolutely have to clear up a major misconception. We've all heard the famous phrase, right, that God himself could not sink this ship. But the truth is, nobody really heavily touted the Titanic as unsinkable before she sailed. As cultural historians point out, this myth was largely a post-hoc cultural invention. It was basically a narrative created after the disaster to kind of make sense of the catastrophe. It was a way to frame this incredibly random tragedy as a classic tale of human hubris finally meeting its nemesis.
Act 2. The Maiden Voyage.
And this brilliantly illustrates the situation as of April 10, 1912. The Titanic was ready. She departed Southampton carrying over 2,200 souls, and honestly, an incredibly stark social divide. Up in first class, you had the wealthiest individuals in the Western world, billionaires like John Jacob Astor and Benjamin Guggenheim, who paid up to $4,300 just for a one-way ticket. They were dining on 11-course meals in rooms that rivaled the finest hotels in Paris. Meanwhile, below decks in steerage, passengers paid about $35 for shared cabins. These were mostly immigrants, just seeking new lives in America. But despite this massive wealth gap, every single passenger shared one thing: complete, blind trust in the safety of the White Star Line.
Behind the scenes, though, the operational decisions being made on the bridge were setting the stage for disaster. Throughout Sunday, April 14th, the Titanic's wireless operators received 6 separate messages warning of drifting ice and large bergs directly in their path. 6! Yet, the ship maintained a near maximum speed of 22 knots. Now, while that seems incredibly reckless to us today, it was actually standard maritime practice at the time. You rely on your lookouts and you stick strictly to the schedule. But here's the kicker: those lookouts were handicapped. A seemingly tiny oversight happened right before departure. An officer named David Blair was reassigned at the absolute last minute, and he accidentally took the key to the binocular locker ashore in his pocket. So the lookouts up in the freezing crow's nest, they were forced to rely purely on their naked eyes.
Act 3. The Fatal Collision.
So this brings us to that freezing, completely moonless night of April 14, 1912. At 11:39 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet suddenly spots a massive dark shape against the stars, dead ahead. He rings the warning bell. First Officer William Murdoch has a mere 37 seconds to react. He orders hard a starboard, turning the ship to the left, and reverses the engines. But it's just not enough. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic's starboard side scrapes right along the iceberg at high speed. Thousands of tons of seawater immediately burst through the hull, instantly compromising 6 of the ship's forward watertight compartments.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the forensic evidence left behind. This is a microscopic look at a wrought iron rivet recovered from the hull. Modern metallurgical analysis shows these rivets contained an average of 9.3% silicate slag. To put that into perspective, that is more than 3 times the normal amount. This excess caused the slag to form long stringers within the metal. So under the immense, crushing impact of the collision, these super brittle rivets were highly prone to popping. They essentially unzipped the steel plates of the hull, just allowing the ocean to pour right in.
And compounding those failing rivets was the steel of the hull plates themselves. Metallurgical data proves the Titanic steel had incredibly low fracture toughness in ice water temperatures. It behaved in a completely brittle fashion. When you combine that with the microcracks created when the rivet holes were originally cold punched back at the shipyard, well, the ship's physical structure simply was not equipped to absorb this kind of impact in freezing waters.
If you enjoy documentaries that uncover the stories behind history's biggest events, subscribe to Golden Fern. We explore the moments that change the world and bring hidden details beyond the headlines.
Act 4. The Sinking.
Down in the bowels of the ship, designer Thomas Andrews delivered a really grim mathematical certainty to the captain. The Titanic would founder in about 2 hours. And that's exactly when this number became a death sentence, 20. There were only 20 emergency lifeboats on board. Now sure, this was technically compliant with the incredibly outdated laws of the time, but it was enough to carry barely half of the people on board. Knowing this, a grim Captain Smith had to give the heavy order to begin loading women and children first.
Desperate distress signals were broadcast into the pitch-black night right around midnight, and the absolute tragedy here is that salvation was just miles away. The SS Californian was literally so close its crew could see the Titanic's lights. But their wireless operator, Cyril Evans, well, he had gone to bed just 10 minutes before the collision, turning off his receiver. The RMS Carpathia did hear the call and immediately raced to help, but she was 58 miles away. That's a minimum of 4 hours. So as Second Officer Charles Lytler and the rest of the crew frantically lowered the insufficient lifeboats, they were completely, tragically on their own.
The end came violently. By 2:15 a.m., the angle of the deck became so incredibly steep that grand pianos, massive boilers, and tons of coal just tore free, crashing toward the submerged bow with this absolutely deafening roar. By 2:18 a.m., the massive stern lifted vertically into the air, its bronze propellers silhouetted against the stars. The structural stress was just too great. With a series of deep, terrifying groans, the massive ship violently fractured in half, right between the third and fourth funnels. Finally, at 2:20 a.m., the RMS Titanic disappeared beneath the freezing surface, beginning its 2.5-mile plunge to the ocean floor and taking approximately 1,500 lives with her.
Act 5. Rescue and investigation. Let's move to and see how this builds.
The sun finally rose on a horrific scene of floating debris and freezing survivors in lifeboats, until the Carpathia finally arrived to pull them from the Atlantic. Almost immediately, sweeping governmental inquiries were launched in both the United States and Britain. This disaster was a brutal global wake-up call. Maritime laws were entirely rewritten. They mandated 24-hour radio watches, required enough lifeboats for every single soul on board, and even created the International Ice Patrol to track drifting bergs. As historians often note, these common-sense rules were unfortunately written in the blood of the victims.
So, for over 7 decades, the Titanic lay hidden in the abyss. Experts constantly debated exactly how she sank. That was, of course, until 1985, when Dr. Robert Ballard finally discovered the wreck. His expedition definitively confirmed what some heavily ignored survivors had been claiming all along. The magnificent ship had indeed violently split in two at the surface right before sinking.
Act 6. Legacy of the Titanic.
So why does this specific story continue to captivate the globe over a century later? So the crucial point is captured perfectly here. Had any one of these ifs turned out right, every life might have been saved. But they all went against her, a classic Greek tragedy. It's that devastating cascading chain of what-ifs, you know? What if they had actually heeded the ice warnings? What if they had that one binocular key? What if the steel wasn't so brittle, or the rivets were purely forged? What if the Californian's radio was just left on?
Was the Titanic disaster simply an unavoidable accident, or a tragedy created by a series of human decisions?
If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Golden Fern, like the video, and comment below with the next historical story you want us to explore. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary. I'll just leave you with this final, silent piece of forensic evidence, a badly corroded bulkhead rivet, forever bearing the invisible stresses that brought down the Ship of Dreams. It's a haunting reminder for us all to ask ourselves, what unsinkable systems are we blindly trusting today?